and welcome to part 2 of I Created a Wargame. That's my title for the video, by the way. So yes, as I said in part 1, this is going to be the full, frank, and my side of the story of what happened with my game, how it was created, how it all ended, and everything else. If you have literally are a member and you haven't watched part 1 yet, then go over and watch part 1 and you kind of see what I'm going to be doing with the game. But this is basically me talking about the game. So where to start? I think we should start from the beginning. The beginning is always a good place to start. So the beginning of this, how did the game start? Well, like a lot of people playing games, you kind of sometimes get those people at gaming clubs that like to create their own games. Now, I have created my own games a lot since I was a kid. I created a game with my real father for Speedway. And if you don't know what Speedway is, it's where you get 4 bikes that basically don't have brakes. And they kind of sort of slide around an oval sort of dirt track with a metal plate on his foot, and they kind of slide around. Now, when I used to be a kid, they used to sell little sort of toy speedway bikes, and I got quite a few of them, and we made a board. And bear in mind, I would have been about like 9, 10 years old about this point, and we made a board out of cardboard, and we had it gridded, and we would play Speedway, and we wrote rules for it, and that was kind of my first sort of jumping into creating games. From there, I then decided to start making my own game for Formula 1, and I had lots of little Formula 1 cars, and I literally made massive, and I'm talking massive, 4 foot by 2 foot, sometimes slightly wider up to 3 foot, racing circuits for things like Silverstone and the Nürburgring ring and the track in Brazil and stuff like that. And I had like 4 or 5 of these tracks made, and I had like a number of different cars. I had like a couple of Ferraris, a couple of McLarens, some Williams, some Lotuses, a Benetton, and I would happily sit in my room and roll my dice and move the cars around and have races in my own little game. And I even made my own little rules. Now, they weren't amazing. I was a child, but the creativeness of creating games is always been there. So I would probably say it's probably around 2011, maybe 2012. I noticed that there was nothing on the market for things like Star Wars, and I decided to write myself a Star Wars miniatures game. Now, we had a miniatures game at the time, which was like this sort of D20 system, and you bought them in the boosters, and they were about that little big, and you kind of had like some cards. You got the miniature, and there was like it was like a hex, Star Wars type hex game. I don't even know if it's made anymore, but it was stupidly busted and broken. It was never really balanced. But I had a lot of that stuff, and I wanted to make an actual proper Star Wars game, a bit like 40k, a bit like a little bit of fantasy, but more Star Wars centric. And that's what I did. I wrote this game, and I wrote some really cool combat mechanics, and I really, really liked it. And it was quite dynamic. The idea was that both players rolled dice at the same time, and you would roll, I would roll, and we would sort of like, essentially, I got the idea of how Risk, the board game, works, where you roll off your attack and defense dice, and if the attacker scored higher than the defender, then that was a successful hit, and if the defender scored higher than the attacker, that was a successful block, and that's kind of the premise of the mechanic that I used for the game, and that's how combat originally sort of worked. It's evolved a lot since then, but essentially that was the sort of main sort of idea of combat. And there were certain rules, like Jedi Force powers and stuff like that, would manipulate these dice rolls that would ultimately sort of change how the combat worked out. But yeah, it was a pretty cool idea, and I was really pleased. I was really quite proud of what I created, and I even went as far as contacting Lucasfilm and giving them my pitch of this game, of what I was doing, and I was completely out of my depth and naive and had no idea how things like branding and licensing and all of that kind of thing worked. And they replied to me going, yes, it's a really cool idea. Here's the licensing fee and how the deal would work. And I was like, yeah, I can't afford that. So I'd spent all this time making this game, and I had nothing really to put the game in, because Star Wars was never going to happen, because I was an ex-squaddy with no real money in my pocket, not being able to really do this, and there was no such thing as Kickstarter and things like that at that time. So it was like what do I do? Or I think Kickstarter was, but there was never really it was never going to happen. So I decided to start creating my own stories around this game, and then the more stories I created, the more the game started to grow, and it turned into sort of a Vikings versus werewolves, or Lycan fiends as I called them. And while I was at doing painting for a local club in Larne and Whitehead, known as Mini Wargaming, not Mini Wargaming, We Gamers, sorry. I had met a really cool local artist by the name of Alan Perry, who was an absolute really talented guy. And we got talking, and I explained this thing that I was doing and creating. He really liked what I was doing, and we ended up meeting up in a cafe in South Belfast, not too far away from Botanic. And we had a brew and a chat, and we talked about the game, and he did some art for me. And some of the earlier pieces of artwork of the Lycan Fiends and the Nordrassil, it was all from Alan, and it was absolutely amazing to actually see things that were in your head coming to the page and in reality. And this kind of created the foundation of what the game would become. So I continued working away on the rules and bringing it to the club to get things like people playing it and testing it and help practice and sort of hone out rules and things like that. And it started to develop and really sort of take a life of its own. And then what I noticed was the Beasts of War, or On Tabletop as they are now known about, was starting to do articles on it. And you can go over onto their website and search for Wrathborn, and you can see some of the earlier stuff. Now, there is a troll that I sculpted or tried to sculpt, and it's fucking horrible. I mean, it is absolutely terrible. I'm not going to show pictures of it because it's just, I just want to forget about it. But there's still photos of that thing there. So if you want to go over to On Tabletop, Google Wrathborn, and you'll see all the articles and everything else. I think they're still there. And there's a picture of the troll, and it's just terrible. But I'd had while this was doing, I realized that miniatures was going to be a thing that I needed to do, and I'd found a freelance sculptor, Wolfbane Art, Alessio from Italy, and he gave me a really good price for doing some greens, and I do still own them. They're basically in a box on the bottom of this shelving thing behind me. And I got the Jarl done, and I got a Nordrassil Warrior done, and I think there's a couple of Lycan Fiends, the big wolf guys. I think there's the Alpha, the original Alpha based off Alan's art, and a couple of the pack mates. So I had miniatures, and I even got as far as getting them cast into made and trying to sell. And I think a couple of my friends actually own some of the original Lycans and Nordrassil and stuff. And it was really cool to actually have miniatures and get them sold. And it was like, this is amazing. When I was looking to create the Snow Troll, this is when I met Dan Kelly from Liontown Miniatures. And I was sort of looking at 3D sculpting and sort of looking to see how that would be done. And I got talked to one guy who was an absolute amazing sculptor. He'd worked on games such as Twisted and stuff like that. And he was absolutely amazing, and he sort of did a couple of mock-up renders of the Snow Troll based off the artwork that Steve Cornish from No Fixed Course had done, or as he was known then, the Goldfish of Justice. And I met Dan, and Dan was a budding 3D sculptor at the time. Still had a full-time day job as a facilities manager, and was doing 3D sculpting in his spare time as his sort of his hobby. And we kind of come together. We kind of started working. He started doing the Snow Troll, and as we were developing this working relationship, we kind of become friends. We would pretty much speak every day. Pretty much he would ring me on his way home, and we would smash out ideas and talk about nerd stuff, and generally just do what friends did, and there was a clear bromance definitely forming between the two of us, and it was really cool. Like my ex-wife would even comment that I'd spent more time on the phone to him than I would with her, and it was very true. That's pretty much how we operated. We batted ideas off each other a lot. But as things progressed, it turned out that he was going to be doing the sculpting for me, and I was going to end up writing a game for him for like a dungeon crawler type thing that he wanted to do. Because at the time he was working on a load of RPG miniatures, which he later took to Kickstarter and did quite well on it. And we worked really well together. We had very similar ideas of what we liked in regards to aesthetics and stuff. Now, there were some things that I didn't, like he is very much into his Final Fantasy. I didn't. Now, as we were working, it came very evident that it would be best that I joined Lion Tower, and we formed correctly, and we come in. And the initial agreement was that I would join Lion Tower Miniatures, and I would be the games director. And once the game was making money, or started to make money and pay for itself, I would be made a company director, and we talked about shares and all of that kind of crap. And basically, that was cool, but that was never really a goal for me. My main goal has always been that I wanted my game out there, and I wanted a book in my hand with my name on it. That was my ultimate goal for always doing this, and it still is to a point. And we started ramping things up, in 2018, we went to the UK Games Expo, and that was the first time we actually had proper box sets for the Nordrassel on sale for previews, and we had a couple of the sort of the Lycans on display, and there are pictures, like you can go search Wrathborn, and there is pictures up there. So there's not many pictures of the original sort of the first 2018 UK Games Expo show that I have myself. But there's a couple of pictures here of the final day when we actually got the printout of the Snow Troll done. There was an issue with the base, hence the reason why the base is like that. But yeah, this is the display. We had the Nordrassel, and as you can see, we had the Lycan Fiends there, and those were for sale. And in the background, you got the white boxes as well for the two factions, and then in the red little trays, it's all of Dan's sort of D&D roleplay type miniatures. But yeah, this was really cool. It was finally got the lights working, and you can kind of see the Snow Troll and the kind of thing that we were doing. And at the time, that 3D printer was the same 3D printer that Games Workshop was using. So we really meant business in what we were doing. And it was all blue tack together, obviously. But yeah, this was 2018. So 2018 was really good. UK Games Expo was good. Dan was up for an award for Best Miniatures, Best New Miniatures. And we had this really cool thing going on, that we had this vote against Games Workshop and War Cradle, and then there was like me and Dan at Lion Tower, and it was amazing. And we came third, obviously, but it was really cool that like the two big companies, two industry giants, basically facing off against an indie company of two guys basically working out of their house. And 2018 really sort of opened it up, and it was the first time for me, being able to speak to the general public in person about what I was doing and what I wanted to do, and it was absolutely amazing. The feedback that we got was just phenomenal. We made a lot of friends. People that I later on would turn against me quite quickly once they realised that I had nothing to give them, and I'll talk about them very soon. And it was really, really cool, and 2018 was good. Okay, so before we really get into 2019 UK Games Expo, we're going to talk a little bit about the Kickstarter. So at the end of 2018, we'd gone for a Kickstarter, and on the build up to that, we got some of our miniatures painted, and they were professionally painted by none other than Angel Grinaldes, and these were the pack leader, the Omega, the Stalker, and then the pack mates. And Angel Grinaldes painted these, and they're stunning. Like when you actually see them in person, like it's insane, like how good these miniatures are. So yeah, absolutely amazing. And ultimately, the Kickstarter didn't work. I'm not too sure why. I'm not too sure if the pricings were too high, or our goal was too big, or the page wasn't very good. There's a lot of things that you could probably look back at it now and see that we did wrong, and that it didn't work. Was it ready to go at that stage? Maybe not. Maybe we pulled the pin too early, and we should have had a little bit more. There's a lot of things that we could probably talk about, and after the Kickstarter failed, there was a lot of conversation about Wrathborn and Wrathborn's future. Dan was quite adamant that that it probably wouldn't go anywhere, and it was probably going to be dead in the water. And I think the issues between the two of us really sort of escalated, or sort of started at the end of the Kickstarter, and the Kickstarter failing, because it didn't make any money. And ultimately, that was Dan's goal, is to make money, where mine is more of a creative thing. So there was issues, there was problems, but we strove forward and we went to retail, and things started selling, and the game moved forward massively during that period. And then we started getting ready for the UK Games Expo in 2019, and I'll get photos and I'll bring them up now. Okay, 2019 landed. UK Games Expo 2019, and boy, we come out hard, really hard. Like this was the display cabinet for the Lycan Fiends, and as you can see, I'm really pleased because that Warg in the background, I painted that, and I have a painted miniature alongside miniatures painted by Angel Grinaldes, and I'm super chuffed with that. Absolutely loved it. Really loved the Warg miniature. It was such a cool time. People playing the game, which was really, really cool to do. And yeah, me without a beard, and that individual with a bald head who we will not talk about. But yeah, the game was there. It had the rules. We had a board. We had the banner, the stand. We had a pretty decent area, and it was really cool. The Nordrassel that Dana painted up, and they would look really nice. And more people playing it, and it really went well. I mean, we had this, and the actual stand itself, and we do have a picture of it, of our stand, and that was our area that we had, which was really good. You know, it looked professional. It looked the part. You know, it looked like we knew what we were doing. You know, we had a proper Perspex glass casing for the miniatures. And we had, like, in the top two, as you can see in those little ones, we had the Wrathborn stuff, and then in the larger one at the bottom, we had all of the RPG miniatures from Dan's set, and we had a demo table, which is something that we never had in 2018, and it went really well. Now, Dan had made the decision of only having £1,000 worth of stock for Wrathborn, and that is basically roughly what you can see to the left-hand side in those white boxes. We had starter sets for the Lycans, we had starter sets for the Nordrassel, and then we had a good number of the Wargs and the Snow Trolls being sold separately. And we had like little deals as well, like if you bought one starter set, you could get like a discount on the second, or if you bought like a starter set, you could get the monster for a thing. Now, for me, as the creative who created, come up with these ideas, I was blown away by this. Like I was like still so excited and so in my element. It was so good. And to get people to play the game and to talk about the miniatures and talk about the ideas, it was so good. Now, I will just point out that by the end of Play Friday, so it was a 3-day convention, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. By the end of Play Friday, we had sold 80% of Wrathborn's stock. Most of the faction starter sets had gone, and I think Saturday we only had like a handful of Wargs and Trolls and a couple of single miniatures and maybe 1 or 2 faction starter sets on the Saturday. Now, that's amazing. Like, the response we got was just so crazily good. And even now, I look back and think, why did we not have more stock? Like, really, why? In fact, if it wasn't for Rob, who was at the time doing our casting, who is now pretty much in charge of the Lord of the Rings specialist game at Games Workshop, and I believe he's got something to do with the Old World as well. Rob Alderman, he was our caster. He turned up on the Sunday with a box of stock that he had lying around in his warehouse. So we had more stuff to sell, thankfully, because we'd pretty much by Sunday ran out of Wrathborn stuff, like completely ran out. The vast majority of the money that we made over those 3 days at the show came from Wrathborn, not the RPG miniatures. But that's not all that happened that weekend. That weekend for me, I spoke to Osprey that morning on the Saturday, and their publishing guy had decided to come over to have a chat with us and have a look at what we were doing. Now, we pretty much bagged a publishing deal for Osprey. And if you don't know who Osprey are, games like Burrows and Badgers and Ragnarok, they're the ones that produce those rulebooks. So we had a publishing deal for the rulebook, and it was pretty cool. When you look back at it, like what was happening that weekend was literally us about to jump into the market in a really big way, and it was a game changer. Like this was our chance. This was our opportunity, and there was a lot of really cool things happening. Like the Osprey deal was just so cool. Now, one of the things that they did want us to do was change the focus from Vikings and werewolves to the kingdoms of Veneria, which were like a feudal medieval society type, like, you know, knights and stuff, and sort of like an undead type faction. Now, one of the things that should be in that cabinet is the entire Kingdoms of Veneria faction starter set should have been previewed and printed, but Dan had issues getting those printed. Now, once I actually go into what happened afterwards this show, and then what he ended up doing, you can see from my understanding and from my look back, and this may not necessarily be what Dan intended, but we'll talk about what happened to a lot of that stuff. So yeah, the show for me went absolutely phenomenal. Like the 3 days was amazing. The networking was great. We got a publishing deal. And the Saturday night when we got back to Dan's, we were talking about the deal, and the issue of what name was going to be on the book come up. Now, Dan wanted the book to be Lion Tower Miniatures. I was like, no, you have credit for the miniatures. I've worked on the book. The book is mine. My name's going on the book. You haven't wrote any of this, so you shouldn't get credit for it. Like, and it's certainly not going to be like written by Lion Tower Miniatures. Lion Tower Miniatures will have their logo on it, but it will say on the front of that book written by me, because I've written that book. This is me. You get credit for the miniatures. I'm getting credit for the rules. And the way that Osprey were going to do it was, and this was essentially the deal, that they would essentially cover the book. They would do the book themselves. And I would have to green light and write the book. And any artwork that they produced for the book would have to be approved by me. But ultimately, all of that kind of stuff would be done by them. And as the author of the book, I would be given 10% royalties for every unit sold. Now, that sounds amazing when you say it. 10% royalties for each unit sold. That's amazing. But what you forget is that they may go to a shop in America and go, we have a book to sell. Do you want to buy it? And they'll be like, yeah, we'll take 100 copies. And they might sell that book to that retailer at like $6 a book. That retailer might then retail it for $30 a book to the general public. But they're buying it from the distributor, essentially, for $6. Now, that $6, I'd make 10%, which is like 60 cents. It's not much. It's like when you think about it, and then you've got conversion rates and stuff. So out of those 100 books sold for $6, I would make $60. Right, that's it. And then when we convert that to UK money, I'd make it like 50 quid. Now, it's not game changing. It wasn't going to ever make me rich. I was never going to go, well, I'm going to quit my daytime job now and I'm going to drive a Lamborghini. Like, that was never going to happen. the company, as in we, the company, we would get our books from Osprey at obviously at a same type of discount, and then we'd be able to sell them at £25 a unit. But the vast majority of that money, Dan would make the profit off because he's the majority shareholder in the company, or at least that's what I thought. So he would still be making more money off my idea and off my game than what I would be. And that is generally what I think started causing the problems. Little did I know that Dan was already speaking to my mini factory. Now, one of their representatives had come up to the stand, I think it was on the Saturday or the Sunday, and asked for him, and he spoke to me originally, and I was like, yeah, Dan's over there. And Dan got a lot of these type of guys coming up about digital sculpting and stuff like that. That's kind of what happens at these trade shows. You've got a lot of the companies walking around going, hi, we can make this from you in our Chinese factory, and they could do this. And I honestly thought it was one of these guys. Little did I know that this guy was all about STL files and selling STL files on my mini factory. And if I'd have known what my mini factory was, I would have probably had alarm bells at that point because of what was about to happen. And I did not realize this was coming. We finished the show on a pretty big high. We pretty much sold everything that we wanted to sell, everything. Everybody loved the game, what we were doing. They really liked some of the things that we were coming up with and the new factions and things that were coming out. And we had a publishing deal in the bag. Like, this was it. This was it. We were now going to actually go and do something that we tried the year before on Kickstarter and failed. And we kind of had that momentum now. We can't, it was like, since the Kickstarter at the end of 2018 and like 7-8 months later, it was completely different. We were really ramping up. In hindsight, we should have done the Kickstarter in 2019, and I think we would have funded and the game would have been out in the public, and I would have been a full-time games dev now, and Wrathborn would have been amazing, and it would just be life-changing. That wasn't to happen. So let's go to the drama, okay? The drama section of this story. What happened? Well, I come back to Belfast buzzing, thinking everything had happened and it was amazing and going to be great. And we kind of sort of like had a bit of a chill time, and I was working away on the rules and fixing some of the issues that I'd found and some of the stuff that I wanted to change, and was working on faction lists for some of the new factions and stuff that we had planned. And about 2-3 weeks after the event, I got a Facebook message. And that Facebook message was from Dan, basically telling me that he was no longer making physical miniatures. He was going to focus solely on STLs and selling STLs through things like my mini factory and Patreon. And his work on Wrathborn was over. Now, I knew nothing of this until that Facebook message. Now, I will say this, 5 years on, he is still to speak to me one-on-one on the phone. We still haven't talked about this. He decided afterwards he had his little thing with chilling wargamers, which were so far up our arse during this to get freebies and run around and making content, inviting us onto their YouTube live streams and stuff like that, either myself or Dan, that once the split had happened, I might as well have not existed. In fact, some of the comments was from Elston was pretty nasty, directed towards me, and the reason why is because I had nothing to offer them. Dan was making miniatures of likeness of Spud and Elston, and yeah, like he was actually Wargame. He was actually, he'd go to ChillCon and stuff like that, which we'd been to and done really well at. And yeah, it was amazing how quickly people turn their back on you when they can't get anything out of you. And I relatively stayed silent about what was going on and what had happened, and especially from my point of view. Obviously, I invested quite a bit of money into the company, and trying to get that money back resulted in me losing everything for the game that I hadn't already done prior to moving into Lion Towers. Now, as I said earlier in the video, that once the game was making money, I was meant to be made a games director, a director of the company. That never happened. In fact, it didn't happen at all. So the company made money. Lion Tower Miniatures sold Wrathborn miniatures and profited off an IP that was mine. And not once, and the only time I ever seen any money from any of this, from both 2018 shows and the 2019 shows, was £100. Now, we had a chat at the Sunday night afterwards, and we were like in Dan's dining room and laughing and joking, and because it was a great weekend, and we made a crap load of money, and we were like, we should take £100 each and treat our wives. And that £100 is basically all I ever got for all of this work that I ever did. But there was thousands of pounds. We made, like, I think I remember rightly, there was near on about £3,500, nearly £4,000 from 2019. Like, and I think that was profit. We basically cleared the cost of the stand and everything else. And it was everything. And none of that, I never seen any of that. Looking back on it now, like when it all happened, I was angry about it, and I was angry because like 7 years of my work just disappeared. But I think what really annoyed me was the most is that there was no conversation, there was no talk. Like I tried to ring him, and he would never answer the phone. Even now, if I had his phone number and rang him, I know fine well he would never answer the phone. I've commented and things like that on his Twitch channel and stuff, and we haven't really talked. I don't wish him any ill will now. And, you know, fair play for him to do what he's doing. And he's been relatively successful with working with likes of doing terrain and things for likes of Baron Wars and stuff like that. And working with Andy Hobday and stuff at Futsal and doing other stuff. Yeah, fair play. You know, he is a talented guy. He's a talented sculptor. But I do think that if we'd have actually talked as friends and as business partners, I do think that we could have been looking at the STL thing and how the STL market worked. We could have probably been one of the first companies out there to actually produce a game, and we could have fully had all of the factions as STLs, sold through My Mini and Patreon and stuff like that. We could have been the first ones to do it, and I think that would have probably alleviated the pressure that Dan was under. And that could have worked. But again, communication is key. But I think a lot of this was down to the Osprey deal. Now, again, I can only speculate on Dan's motivations for what he did, because he's never actually spoke to me about it. And he's never sort of publicly said it. He kind of has had interviews with Chilling Wargamers and stuff, and it's always been his side of the story. It was never really mine. Now, he sold the rights to the miniatures from Wrathborn to another guy who basically started attacking me online and trying to troll me and stuff with his little friend. And then eventually did Kickstarters and stuff, which Dan was involved in and obviously making more money from. Smart move. But as far as I'm aware, Pagan Miniatures have done absolutely nothing with these miniatures since, which is an absolute shame that that's happened, because they're beautiful miniatures, and like just above on that shelf, there's 2 black cases, and all my miniatures for Wrathborn are up there. It's took me a long time to want to talk about this. And obviously getting my rules back and everything has kind of rekindled that. And I thought, you know, this is probably the best place to do it. Like I said, I've got no ill will at Dan. And I do think that if we'd have actually had a conversation, that we could have probably have done something in regards to the STLs and the game. And being the first of its kind. Because at that point, nobody was doing this. No one was making a game and having it entirely supported by STLs. Nobody. We would have been the first ones to do that. And we could have looked at physical miniatures again later on down the line once we were a lot more successful and bedded in that way. And gone in, say, like a partnership with Footstore, who at the time was doing our casting, and had a partnership. We could have easily made a partnership deal with them that they produce the physical side of the game and they get a slice of that pie. And we get a slice of the pie because we own the IP. That could have easily happened, and that could have easily been done. And I imagine if we'd have sat down with Mark and Andy at Futsal, we could have hammered that deal out at a later date. But none of this was transpired, and none of this was done because none of it was ever talked about, because Dan refused to speak to me. And that's what really hurt me the most. It's such a shame, because 2019 was the start of something amazing. Like, Wrathborn was going to market. It was going to go. It would have changed aesthetics, yes. But those factions that originally started the game would have been there. We would have had a book sold, but like through Osprey and other retailers. And it would have been amazing, and it would have been so really cool. And it sadly never happened. And I don't know why. Like, even today, I don't know why. So, you know, like I said, I've got no ill will towards Dan anymore for what he did. You know, he did what he did. He gave me some excuse about it. It's something to do with his family and all that kind of stuff. But cool, whatever. Like, things like that obviously could have been fixed. Things like that could have been worked around, and we could have found a solution that would have worked best for both parties. But it didn't. But ultimately, obviously, the fight ensued for me to get my money back out of the company, and which resulted in me having to sign a document basically saying that I relinquish all rights to the miniatures and anything that was Wrathborn related that was paid for through Liontown Miniatures, which meant I lost the artwork. Like that banner with the artwork from the front cover of the rulebook was lost. I lost a lot of artwork. I lost a lot of stuff that we'd worked on later factions, and likes of the Kingdoms of an area. That entire faction disappeared. I lost complete control of that because that came after I joined Lion Tower. And ultimately, if you look at Dan's Patreon page, you'll notice that there's a lot of feudal stuff with guys riding around on chickens. Now, a lot of that stuff came from what he worked online from Wrathborn. That most of that human range comes from Wrathborn. That was the original paladins and sort of militia and the mountain paladins on the chocobos was something that, like, I never really wanted them in the game, but I always wanted Dan to feel part of the game, and that his input was validated and important to me, and that I wanted him to feel that this was not only mine, but that he had an opinion and he had a say in it, and that's why I let those things come in. And I was never a big fan of them because it's not my aesthetic, it's not my style. I'm not a massive Final Fantasy type sort of fan, but it was something that I did for him. And like, yeah, all of that stuff that he has on his Patreon now, a lot of that came off the back of Wrathborn. His sort of fantasy band, he has like a dwarf playing the bagpipes and stuff like that. That came off the back of a conversation we had as we were walking out of the 2019 show, and we were talking about, like, we should do a band of like a goblin and a dwarf playing bagpipes and all that kind of, and Dan ended up doing like that part of his Patreon and stuff. So, you know, yeah, he got a lot of good ideas and worked off the lot of back of that. But a lot of that came from that. The townsfolk and stuff, the guard, a lot of that came from the sort of basic troops for the kingdoms and area, which is cool, which is a shame because we had so many cool ideas. But yeah, but that's essentially what happened, and it died. And I did when it all ended, I was very angry. I'd be honest, I was, and I took a little bit of time out and I tried to sort of salvage it, and it soon became very real that I was never really going to be able to do this on the scale that we were doing it, because I can't sculpt. Like, if you've looked back at that troll on tabletop, you'll see I can't sculpt. Now, maybe I should learn how to digitally sculpt. Maybe I might do that in the future, but I can't sculpt right now. And I can paint and I can create rules and I can write stories, but that's my side. The sculpting side is something that I don't do. And I didn't really know what to do, and I realized that without miniatures that the game wasn't really going to do very well. Now, obviously, times have changed. 5 years is a long time, and the industry has changed a lot in that time. So miniature agnostic type rule sets are definitely viable. 3D printing makes things like that so easy. And as a creative, to create factions for a game, you just have to find a set of miniatures out there that are freely available, and basically write rules inspired on them, and then point people towards them and go, if you want to use this faction, go and buy those miniatures. It doesn't matter about, you don't need trade agreements or anything like that. You're writing a rules for a game, and if they kind of fit your theme and aesthetic for that setting, let people freely choose which miniatures they want. So miniature agnostic games work quite well, and there's a lot of them out there now. And obviously that's what I'm going to be doing with Wrathborn going down the line. But as all the drama, yeah, it is what it is. It's sad that it kind of happened. I think looking back now, there was a learning experience, and I hope Dan has learned a lot of things from this, and I hope that he realizes that how he handled it was bad, and I hope he's learned from that, and hopefully one day we can have a chat, and we can a proper chat, like one-on-one, and he can let me in on the thought process, because from my view, if he'd have turned around to me and said, I can't do physical miniatures anymore because the pressure and everything else around it is too much, I can only focus on one side, and that's the STL side, then my response to that would have been, no problem, let's go full STL. Let's do that. If you believe that this is the best thing and that this is where this could go properly, let's do that. I trust you in making that decision. I will still do what I'm doing, and I will trust you in that decision. And we could have continued forging on, doing what we did in that capacity, but we didn't. And that's down to him, not me. So it's a massive shame. But yeah, but it was amazing. Like, I can look back on this and real fond memories of that. I was on a trade stand talking to nerds and nerding out over a game that I created, and miniatures that come from ideas that come out of my head, and telling stories about a world that I pretty much lived in for like 8 years, and it's so amazing to do, and it was such a privilege to do as well, and the opportunity of being able to get there was amazing, and a part of that is down to Dan as well. The two of us got us there, but that stand and being there is down to Dan. The vast majority of the Wrathborn stuff was down to me, and that's what I said earlier in the video. We worked really well together, and it's just a shame that the friendship and the business partnership ended 3 weeks after the UK Games Expo 2019. It's such a shame, but yeah, I can mull over it as long as you want me to. But onwards and upwards. So that is basically the story of Wrathborn, how it started, the drama, how it ended, and everything else. Like I said, I have no ill will. I'm not really going to go into Adam and Pagan and his little skull fuckery, because the guy's a dick and I don't really care. He got given some amazing miniatures. He had the opportunity to do something really cool with them, and he fumbled it and did nothing. And I'm not even too sure if he even sells the miniatures through his website anymore. Yeah, it's such a shame, and I just hope that he still has the miniatures painted by Angel Grinaldes, and they're not sold soft somewhere or mistreated and chipped, and they're being looked after, because they were amazing. But yeah, either way, what's done is done. So going forward, what I'm going to be doing, if you watch part one, I'm going to be doing, obviously, I'm going to revive the game. I'm going to up-tweak it, change it, make it miniature agnostic, and then I'm going to make it available through my YouTube merch store and my Patreon store. The rules are going to cost £5, and by the time I'm finished, it will include the background section and the rules section. And it's going to be pretty hefty document, so it's going to be pretty cool. But yeah, and maybe one day we'll look at like a print on demand, or an actual printed version of it as well. Seeing if I can get the art and stuff like that done. But this is my baby, and I want to do something with it. And I think I owe myself to do it, and I owe the people that have stuck by me for many years when I've done this and have played it and enjoyed it to actually finish it and do something. And that's what I'm going to do. So thank you for watching this video, and thank you for taking your time. It's a long one. It's a big one. It's a long one. It's a spicy one, but hopefully you'll enjoy it and like it. And thank you very much for obviously joining the membership. Please stay around. Please stay, and if you want to up your level so you can actually get into some of the painting videos that I will be putting up onto the channel over time, and then please feel free. And yeah, thank you very much for all of your support. It means a lot, and I will see you all in the next video. So from me, thank you, and I will catch you all later, everybody. Goodbye for now.